All right, everyone, we start off today with a subject that at first it's like, preaching to the choir, like, no duh, of course, the Biden administration sucks. But I wanted to go a little bit further into it because you've got an attempt by the lamestream right now, by the Biden admin, the lamestream media and so forth, the lame establishment in general, to hide this fact from people, partially with push polling. As I explained in one of my New Tech exclusives a couple of days ago, if we look at the RCP aggregate, certainly we're seeing statistical anomalies that technically should not exist if you're not using a gross missampling in some polls, and that's just part of it, by the way. Now, first and foremost, well, there's a link in the description archived, of course. You can read that, too. Some of the issues that are going on with Biden at the time. First and foremost, though, there will be a pinned comment if you're watching this video on YouTube. There will be links to 4 other video hosting sites I use, as well as to Substack. Now, I've started doing journalistic content on Substack. It's sort of like these videos, but more rigorous. Notes and so forth, heavily edited. And then the 4 video hosting sites, keep in mind, I upload 4 videos a day, but 2 of them go on YouTube and 2 of them don't. So they're on all these other sites, but they're not on YouTube. That can be because the subject is verboten, it has to do with certain aspects of medicine or politics that YouTube doesn't want you discussing fairly and honestly, or just general overflow. Right now, you've got a huge number of problems going on in the United States. You have the soaring cost of goods, relatively high unemployment in most states. This isn't universally the case. It's funny because the more rural states that tend not to vote for liberals in general are the ones doing better because specifically they ended their lockdowns early, unemployment got reabsorbed, they tend to have less unemployment benefits at the state level, so there's less of an impetus for people to say, well, fuck it, I'm just going to basically grift off the system. I'm basically being paid not to work at the moment. That's happening in blue states, not so much the red ones. So you've got that. Unemployment. You've got inflation now. April's inflation more than twice what it should have been. This probably will not stop anytime soon. You've got a fuel shortage right now. Now, this has nothing to do with Biden's particular policies, but the response to it basically, the other day when asked about this, keep this in mind. I think this is the biggest potential scandal so far of the Biden admin. Joe Biden wouldn't even answer the question when he was asked whether the ransomware hackers that attacked the Colonial Pipeline were paid or not. That's a big fucking ass problem. Right now, he reminds me more and more of Jimmy Carter, which, by the way, doesn't mean great things for the United States. Jimmy Carter had the benefit of at least he was a reasonably honest person. He was just inept. He seemed like a personable guy. By the way, Jimmy Carter is still alive. He's pushing 100 years old, and he's still waging a war on guinea worms in Africa. It looks like he's not going to die until he wins that. He's like, oh, I got brain cancer? Fuck you, I can't die yet. There's still guinea worms in the world. I honestly think that he's going to see them eradicated and refuse to die until that happens, and then the next day he's going to keel over or something. So he's like, oh, I'll just keep some in a jar and I'll live forever. That'd be funny if he tried that. Under Jimmy Carter, you had 3 major features, and these were all reasons why Jimmy Carter lost when he was against Ronald Reagan. Towards the end, it was mainly the economics of the situation. Keep in mind, Jimmy Carter led Reagan most of the time up until the last few weeks of the election. There's a brief, month-long period that Reagan was ahead, but never by significant amounts. And then, of course, on election night, he completely wiped Carter off the face of the earth, and the rest is history, and we had the 80s and neon lights and Miami Vice and all the good things in the world that we should have back. And it looks a lot like Jimmy Carter. Number 1, you had runaway inflation, and the price of goods rising attendant with that, of course. Number 2, you had fuel issues, the oil shocks of the 70s. And number 3, diplomatic problems. And we're seeing that begin to happen as well. With Korea, certainly the issues in Israel and Palestine at the moment. You had diplomatic issues because Carter was seen as weak. And so people began to take advantage of that in order to abuse the United States. When Reagan got in, there was a reason why the Iranian hostage crisis ended on day 1, when Ronald Reagan was in there, because people perceived him as stronger or batshit in some cases, and they thought, well, he's going to nuke us if we don't release the hostages. We're obviously not going to get paid. If the government is involved, as it is, centrally with the energy system in the United States. A lot of people think it's a totally free market. It can be more or less regulated in a general sense, less under like Trump, much more under Biden. The fuel industry, though, is not entirely private. For instance, the U.S. has strategic fuel reserves, which got freed up in order to take pressure off of people during this pipeline crisis. If there was any government involvement with potentially a bunch of ransomware hackers getting paid millions of dollars because they were throttling one of the U.S. pipelines, that would be akin to the sort of diplomatic problems we had under Carter. Now, of course, then you have the Reagan era. He's like, well, we're not going to negotiate with terrorists. We're just going to fucking kill you. Where under Jimmy Carter, it was more, we're going to send in people and try to talk to you. We're going to strongly condemn your actions. We'll pay you money, maybe, so you should probably take U.S. citizens hostage because you might get a payoff. Well, this was one of the biggest problems with the Jimmy Carter era, and part of that almost has to do with the border crisis currently. It's not so much even about the policy, it's about the optics. It's about the perception of other people towards the administration. For example, Biden is still deporting people on the southern border, but the perception is the southern border lacks rigor, is not really being guarded, and that things are much more loose now. Now, that's only partially true. In part, it is true. But the degree to which it's true is considerably less than the optics of the situation. But what happens then is you get 60,000 people crossing in a single month, and you can't stop them all. You're never going to catch half of them. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What I see with this pipeline thing and Biden's unwillingness to answer whether these hackers were paid money, I think answers the question without actually answering it, which is, yes, they got paid. The government knew or was even involved with the fact that they were paid because they freaked out, and now they're covering their ass. We probably won't find out anything about this for a very long time, though. The Biden administration is a failure in domestic and foreign policy, on economics, on the border. He's already failed. What you're not going to see, though, is any rigorous investigation of those failures. You're seeing from the MSM, even now past the sweetheart first 100 days that typically administrations enjoy, they are a bunch of bobbleheads. The only ones that are willing to half-assedly ask rigorous questions are typically shut down by Jen Psaki, and nobody in the journalistic community, so-called, is even willing to call them out on this. Again, there's no attempt to report on these things. Why do you think that The Guardian just unleashed another half-assed hit piece on Odyssey? And this happens with Odyssey and Rumble and BitChute and all of the new tech sites. Because we're out-competing these morons. They're not actually talking about the news. This sort of screed won't be said, even on like Fox News. You'll get Tucker Carlson will have his 10-minute of rage every night, and other than that, even Fox doesn't really investigate the situation. Complete sellouts. Half the people on the network support Biden, I think. And if you look at fucking CNN or MSNBC or something like that, take a look at MSNBC's fucking YouTube channel if you want to see lopsided coverage. You'd think it was the higher budget version of the Young Turks. There's no attempt to actually hold Biden accountable for any of the shitty things he's doing. Then you get push polling. The perception among Biden fans, which are as scarce as hen's teeth, let me tell you, is that Biden's at 60+% approval. But if I look at the polling methodology behind those polls, number one, it's completely flawed. Is, oh yeah, we asked 2/3 of the sample were Democrats. 2/3 of people support Biden. What a big fucking surprise. The sampling's wrong. And then you have a situation, I analyzed this on Substack the other day. You have one scattering of polls that show him at about 50-50, or a little bit less than that. I think YouGov had him at 49% approval, barely above water, 46% disapproval. Then you have another scattering that shows him at 63% approval. The problem is that if I use the standard deviation, if I apply that and add points to the lower number and subtract them from the higher number, even if I go beyond that standard deviation, I still have more than an entire standard deviation left between the two fixed aggregated totals. Well, this can't be true. He's either at one or the other or somewhere in between, but he's not all three. When you have that much of a variation, of a deviation in those two aggregates, they can't coexist. Not even close. Of course, it's because of push polling. What's happened is that CNN and AP and The Hill and some of these other groups very much support Biden. They have manipulated their numbers. They deliberately do this. It's push polling. It's not just by accident at this point. It's not like in 2016 when they were missampling because they were using the voting totals from the prior election. They said, well, so many more people were registered Democrat than Republican, so we've weighted the numbers. We've cherry-picked or fixed our data. We've fortified our data. Well, that gives you a deviation. So, of course, Trump wins the election. They were all surprised, but it was because of their numbers being flawed. This time around, not only have they done that, they've begun to further manipulate the numbers in order to convince people that Joe Biden is popular. I'm here to tell you, if you think that 70% of Americans support his COVID response, then you're not living in the realm of reality. It's simply not observable. Observable reality with the border crisis, inflation, the pandemic, and all of these other problems is that it would be structurally impossible with such a hyper-partisan population for him to be at 60% approval even if he was doing a good job. It's probably no longer possible in this particular climate for any president to get above maybe 55. That's probably the upper limit no matter how good they do, regardless of party or ideology or how wonderful the economy is or is not at the time. It's probably not possible for him to be in the 60s in approval, and yet that's what the Hill claims. Oh yeah, that people are totally unconcerned about runaway inflation or unemployment. They don't care about the fact that Biden is keeping us in Afghanistan for extra months, explicitly antagonizing the Taliban. No, nobody cares about that. They just support his COVID response, and so they wildly approve of him. But that's just not the case. Everyone knows that the Biden administration is a failure already. The fucking liberals, Naomi Wolf is saying that she wants her money back basically every other fucking day. The left has abandoned him. If the left doesn't like you, no Republican likes you, and independents are largely off board, how can you be at 60% approval? It's just not physically possible. It's literally a statistical anomaly beyond the pale. It's not the truth. It's not reality at all. He's in the mid-40s in approval, I would guess. That's about all. Peace out.